Entangling art conservation and its education with quantum physics, implications and possibilities. Scott Joseph Peck, Museum of Biblical Art, National Center for Jewish Art. Nadine Kalin, University of North Texas. Conservator refers to a human being entrusted with the care of art objects or that performs art conservation. Various implied ideas and nuances exist within the use of the term conservation within the field of conservation today. One practice associated with conservation is prevention. Art objects are vulnerable as they age, and they naturally degrade and deteriorate, causing the need for preventative action. The decomposition and damage to art is due to the scientific law of entropy, which holds that all organized matter is moving from a place of order towards disorder. Therefore, information or meaning is potentially being lost in artwork on an ongoing basis. Art conservation can be defined as managing the alterations in artwork affected by the agents of deterioration or damage. Conservation involves a human intermediary practicing preventative measures that can slow the natural aging and other deterioration processes. Inevitably, conservation acknowledges that all artwork will eventually cease to exist in its current material form, and conservation's purpose is to prevent or slow down the ultimate physical material demise of the art object. Damage from catastrophes and accidents make up other ways in which the art conservator stands as an intermediary, offering restoration and salvation for the artwork. Over the passing of time, mutual atrophy and shared trauma experienced between both humans and art objects. The authors of this paper have been compelled to rethink and rework art conservation and its education beyond a human-centric process of art conservator acting upon an artwork. Turning to concepts associated with applied physics has enabled a more interdisciplinary approach to art conservation theory and its learning that expands current limits of thinking and doing in the field.
Our conservation education is human-focused, as evidenced in its reliance on a human savior to heal in a unilinear process without appreciation of the intertwined relationships between the non-human and human. This limited perspective stands in the way of advancement in art conservation curriculum and practice. For example, conservators do not treat the art object as an equal in any way, as the non-human is subservient to the human. The human is the only life in this equation, and the art object is incapable of knowing and acting. Speculative realism maintains that reality exists outside of human experience. In other words, the art object has its own life and existence that must be respected, appreciated, and valued, not only for what we might know from the hard sciences, but also for what is yet to be known about the materials that make up any art object. Speculative realism demands care for the art object because the non-human art object has its own life and existence worthy of such care and a thinking with beyond our current knowledge limits. Thinking with the notion that human being and the non-human art object being have their own lives and knowledges invites new questions for art conservation and education. What relations might be occurring between these two beings? What if knowledges were passed between the two beings, and how does this impact our conservation education and its curriculum?
Artwork that is being conserved acts upon the conservator that is doing the conservation work. For example, upon encountering and performing conservation upon an ancient shattered ceramic vase, the art conservator can potentially experience shared trauma with the damaged non-human artwork. The priceless vase from the Ming Dynasty is before the art conservator, and natural human physiological responses occur, such as anxiety, fear, and grief. This results in actual physiological changes in a human being, including an increase in heart rate, rapid breathing, panic responses, higher blood pressure, and altered brain cell activities, initiating what might be identified as feelings of terror and horror. On the other hand, during the restorative processes of conserving that priceless object, the human conservator can partake in the shared healing of the priceless artwork, resulting in lower blood pressure, controlled breathing, stress relief, and changes in brain cell activities, resulting in feelings of joy, pleasure, and ecstasy. The concept of entanglement from quantum physics offers further light on what might be occurring between human art conservator and the non-human art object. Entanglement refers to a phenomenon where atomic and subatomic particles are related and connected together, regardless of the space between these particles.
Kieran Barat states that entanglement is the involvement or relations between the human and non-human, where meaning and matter are intertwined. Rethinking the human conservator and the non-human art object being conserved through entanglements reconceives of this coupling of beings as entangled and interwoven together. What processes are at work between beings in art conservation? Well, from physics, we learn that the materials of which the artwork and the human body are composed have agency or a capacity to act and produce affect. Here, affects are body-to-body transferences. For example, a marble sculpture damaged by a flood can be considered regarding such agency, while human beings potentially experience feelings such as grief and increased blood pressure upon encountering the damaged artwork. Conservators may also breathe in mold spores while in the presence of such damaged works that modify the functioning of their human lungs. The damaged sculpture's surface molecules changed and are reorganized via conservation treatments, including placing the sculpture in a freezer to stop the mold's growth. The conservator applies solvents to the sculpture that kill the mold cells embedded in the stone, changing the patina or coloring. Affects are taking place on the atomic and subatomic levels as the human body responds to surface changes in the art object, as well as reacts to changes in temperatures. The non-human art object and human conservator are not merely interacting, but intra-acting, which means that both are altering each other on the deepest levels. This isn't the simple unidirectional human to art object intervention the field of art conservation has clung to since its inception as a field of practice. Instead, there are a number of processes taking place in a multitude of directions between materials and ongoing relations, many of which are precognitive or as yet unknown to us as mere humans. These close-ups of the Nuremberg Chronicle pages with fingerprints demonstrate the evidence of non-human being and human being entanglement, displaying affects on the atomic and subatomic levels, continuing for 5 centuries and into the future.
The affects and changes occurring within the human, non-human conservation relationship involve materials. And conservation itself is very materially oriented, demonstrated in art conservation treatment activities that are a part of the curriculum, such as using chemical solvents for cleaning a painting or applying adhesives to reassemble a cracked glass artwork. This paper proposes a materials-based or new materialist perspective of art conservation and its education that acknowledges and speculates on having the other in one's skin, towards dissolving binary divisions between human and non-human through interdisciplinary innovations, tracking art conservation processes as intra-activity between conservation treatments, humans, and art object materials, enlivens these undertakings as beings made up of materials that themselves have agency, with the ability to cause specific affects. The vitality and dynamism of non-human materials and material entities are commonly observed in the conservation process. An example can be found when a hurricane strikes an art museum. Water damage is extreme in hurricane tragedies, with water transforming the molecular structure of the art objects. Paintings exposed to this kind of damage indicate intra-activity and intra-agency, where water alters the canvas with plant cells absorbing the water molecules. The wet surfaces of the canvas breed mold and mildew that further change the molecular structure of the painting. This instance gives insights into how powerful non-human materials are related to material agency and the intra-activities beyond the conservator's interventions.
Our conservation curriculum may access quantum physics concepts of entanglement, intra-activity, and intra-agency through narrativized speculation. For example, students can speculate on how conserving the art object is also conserving themselves. A common conservation task is cleaning an oil painting with distilled water using Q-tips, lightly applying pressure to the canvas in circular patterns, removing any dirt or grime. The student can use these repetitive actions to think and consider how their body is entangled and interacting with the oil painting that they are cleaning. Narratives could access how the repetitive, mindful strokes of cleaning are a meditative series of actions like prayers or other forms of devotion, resulting in shared healing with the art object being restored and cleaned. Students could consider an object that is traumatized over 5 centuries, such as the damaged Nuremberg Chronicle pages. Speculations can be made by the students in considering how their lives have imprinted upon art objects and vice versa. From seeing the fingerprints on the artwork of people dead for centuries, they may guess how they could leave traces of themselves and their humanity upon the art object. This could include their own breath and how it might change the molecular makeup of the object centuries later.
The inclusion of human and non-human object narrative documentation and storytelling could be essential to reforming art conservation education away from being so human-oriented an approach. Speculating on the hidden narratives of human, non-human, entangled lives requires that art conservation curriculum be re-envisioned as never finished, finite, or fixed knowledge. Art conservation is uniquely positioned to think with material phenomena such as art object, in that most training involves extensive time with objects. Interdisciplinary art conservation education embraces a material curriculum that keeps what is already known about non-human materials and lives in tension with what is yet to be discovered. The materiality of practice of thinking with objects could transform art conservation into a more reflective and effective undertaking through embracing the what-ifs of our relations with the non-human. In fact, art conservation may provide a compelling way to reach across all disciplines to teach about how human, non-human, entangled, and interactive care. Responsibility and ethical accountability to art objects are potentially enhanced from holistic relationships with the non-human through interdisciplinary art conservation education, utilizing concepts from quantum physics. Perhaps through a new quantum-based attention towards non-human objects and their materials, a more balanced curriculum might feature mutual co-conservative human, non-human relationships, which are evolving.